Welcome back to The Real Deal. I'm your host, Kim Hollingshead. You're listening to SuperTalk 99.7 WTN in Nashville, Tennessee. On today's program, we are talking about us being in the Gold Coast of the United States. Gold Coast because we have an influx of capital, influx of wealthy individuals in this market, and our real estate has been doing very, very well. It's been appreciating like crazy over the past few years to the point where now the average purchase price in Williamson County is actually $1.1 million. And what that does is it makes things like capital gains taxes relevant to us, because if there's, even in the home that you lived in your primary residence, the exclusion for the payment of capital gains taxes is only $250,000 if you're single, or up to $500,000 if you're married. So if you're living in that $1.1 million average priced home in Williamson County, capital gains taxes are going to affect you. Now, we talked about the widow's trap, how there is this, full exclusion that a widow could be entitled to for the payment of capital gains taxes. If she doesn't sell within 2 years, then she is treated like, I'm saying she because it's called the widow's tax trap. It affects men obviously as well. But if she doesn't sell within 2 years, then she's treated as that single person, and her exclusion is cut in half from $500,000 down to $250,000. So how do you qualify? There are, of course, it's the IRS, you guys. There's always like this litany of requirements, all these tests that you have to pass. Now, if the spouse passes away, then the surviving spouse could be entitled to this full exclusion of the full $500,000 if, number one, as we talked about, the sale occurs within 2 years. Number two, cannot be remarried within that 2-year period. And number three, all of the other requirements, such as living there for 2 out of the past 5 years, did not obtain the property through a 1031 exchange, and didn't use any portion of it for business or rental purposes. All of those requirements still apply. But after 2 years, then the spouse is treated as single. And so I know all of my listeners are going, wait a minute, Kim, that is so unfair. Why would you do that to someone who's a widow? Like 2 years is not very much time. Yes. However, don't forget about the step-up basis, okay? So this is the benefit. This is the added little kind of tool that the IRS has built into the code to help widows and widowers. Now, what it is basically treats the value of the home at the current fair market value rather than at the original purchase price. So we have this example. $1.2 million is a purchase price. $1.2 million is the sales price. Sorry. The property was acquired 26 years ago and they purchased it for $200,000. That's our example. The original basis is $200,000 because that's what the couple purchased the home for back in the year 2000. Okay, so that's why the taxes, the cap gains taxes is calculated on $1 million with, the exclusion being applied. But what happens when there's a step-up basis is that basically the home is not treated like a $200,000 home. The IRS says, well, what's the current fair market value? Current fair market value is $1.2 million, right? Because that's what the house is being sold at. So therefore, there is no cap gains tax owed on it because they treat it like a $0 gain, which is brilliant. Now, how much of a step up in basis you get is going to depend on what state that you're in, because it depends on whether the property ownership is a tenancy in common, a community property state or common law state. Because in Tennessee, we have something called the tenancy by the entirety. Tennessee is a common law state. Married couples own property as a couple, okay? But the way that the law treats it, and this is the best way that I've been able to describe it to people so that they kind of understand what I'm saying here because it's complicated, but the law will treat it as though each person owns 100% of the house. So it's not like the husband owns 50% and the wife owns 50%. That is a community property state. Each one of them owns 50% of the real estate. In Tennessee, with it being a common law state, each spouse, if they own property as a tenancy by the entirety, they're treated where each person owns 100%. It is like total ownership of the entire asset by the both of them. The reason that we choose to do this in this state is because here there are a lot of couples, and we're just a very traditional, older state than the state of California. As you guys know, Tennessee's, been around for, much, much longer than California has. And in Tennessee, with it being common law, you have a husband and a wife, and oftentimes, back then, the wife did not own anything, and she didn't work. She didn't have her own bills. She couldn't get a credit card without her husband signing on it, I think until like the 70s, I'm pretty sure. Couldn't open a bank account without her husband's permission to do that. So it made sense that because the wife in Tennessee doesn't really have any control over finances, this is way back in the day now, of course things are different, that way back in the day, that she wouldn't have control over the finances, that she should not lose her house. She should be insulated from any debts of her husband. That preserves the family home, and it prevents the family home from being taken by creditors, okay? What happens is in Tennessee, the way that the step-up in basis works is that because you're owning it as a tenancy by the entirety, then the IRS will only allow you to take 50% of the fair market value. So the spouse, they get to have their step-up in basis, the deceased spouse, but the surviving spouse doesn't. So in our example of the $1.2 million, you have this house that's being sold for $1.2 million. So 50% of that is $600,000. So the 600, on the old basis would be $200,000, but the new basis is $700,000. And the reason is because the surviving spouse retains 50% of the original basis, which was the $200,000. And then the deceased spouse, they take 50% of the step up in basis of the current fair market value. So they take, theirs is 50%, which is $600,000. And then the original surviving spouse only has $100,000 for a total of $700,000 is the new basis, which for a $1.2 million home still accounts for $500,000 in profit, subject to cap gains. Now, the exclusion of the $500,000 would apply fully to this surviving spouse if she were to sell within 2 years. But if she doesn't sell within 2 years, then it goes down to $250,000, and now she's paying cap gains on the $250,000 that's left over. Not entirely fair. Okay, we're not hugely a fan of this. It does seem to be a little bit unfair to surviving spouses that they have to hurry up and sell a house that they have lived in and all of their stuff is in it and they are comfortable living there, and they're forced to sell within 2 years, or else they'll be subject to cap gains tax as a single person. It's not right. So lucky for you, you do work with and you're a listener of the program. And so now you're going to learn about a couple little tools that we have in our estate planning tool belt here in Tennessee that can definitely help us out with this, okay? You're listening to The Real Deal on SuperTalk 99.7 WTN. I'm Kim Hollingshead. When we come back, we're going to talk about a couple of trusts that can possibly be set up to help you out with all this.